So I just finished Routine and I have some thoughts. For those who don't know, Routine is a first person survival horror game set on an abandoned lunar research station. You're searching for answers about what happened to the crew. There's no combat, and this game has been in development for over a decade. Yeah, you heard that right. Over a decade. We'll get to that in a minute. When I first heard about this game years ago, I was genuinely excited. Space horror is my kind of niche. You know, you got games like Dead Space, Alien Isolation, even Callisto Protocol. Despite its flaws, I'm here for it. The idea of exploring a desolate moon space with no weapons, just you and whatever's lurking in those corridors. That's the good stuff. That's what gets me hyped. But after finishing the whole game, I'm kind of left feeling conflicted. This isn't a bad game by any means, but it's not the masterpiece I was hoping for either. It sits somewhere for me in that 6 or 7 out of 10 range for me, and I think that's actually more frustrating than if it was just outright bad, because you can see the potential, you can see what this could have been. So, let's talk about it. Before we dive into the game itself, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the elephant on the moon. Routine was first announced back in 2012. 2012, let that sink in. The first trailer dropped and people went absolutely nuts for it. The atmosphere, the 80s retro futuristic aesthetic, the promise of this really cool looking space horror game. It looked incredible. It was supposed to come out in 2013. It did not come out in 2013. In fact, it wouldn't come out for another 10 years. The game went completely dark for long stretches. The developer's Lunar Software would occasionally pop up with updates or like a new trailer, but year after year, it passed with no release date. People started joking that it just would never come out. And look, I get it. Game development is hard. Indie game development is probably even harder. I'm not trying to bash developers here because they clearly pour their hearts into this project. But a decade-plus development cycle creates expectations. Fair or not, when you wait that long for something, you expect it to be special. You expect it to justify that wait. When Routine finally came out, it felt less like a triumphant return and more like a quiet arrival, and I think that kind of sums up the game itself. When you first start up on Routine, I'm not going to lie, it nails the atmosphere. You're dropped onto this lunar base, or you wake up in this lunar base, with minimal context. Just a mission to figure out what happened to the crew and what your mission is. And immediately, the game does a great job of making you feel like you're isolated and you don't know what's going to happen next. The station feels real. It's not just like a collection of horror game corridors. It's functioning, or formerly functioning, research facility with like living quarters, laboratories, maintenance areas. The environmental storytelling is actually really strong here. You find crew logs, emails, notes scattered around that paint a picture of what life was like before everything went wrong. So I never truly read up more about what this is just straight one gameplay. I never looked up the lore. I never digged too deep into the logs. But what I did understand, the TLDR, was that there was some kind of flower life form underground, if that makes sense, in the moon. And essentially when the crew first discovered this area, there was this plant life, or flower life, I'm not sure, and it started poisoning the crew and making them go insane, essentially. But anyways, back to the setup. The beginning section to me was quite perfect. You're exploring, you're tense, you don't know what's gonna happen, except sadly you know that what kind of enemies there are based on the trailers you've seen. So the game makes you work for your information. There's no quest markers, which I do like, no objective lists besides your task whenever you go save. You actually have to pay attention and figure things out. I genuinely appreciate the lack of hand-holding. It treats you like an adult, which many games don't nowadays. And another positive thing that I would like to add is that the save system also adds to this tension, because there is no autosave in the game. You have to manually save at these stations or these little areas that your gun connects to. I call it gun loosely, and it's scattered around, and if you die, you start from that last save because there is no autosave. It's old school in a way that I kind of respect, even if sometimes it can be tedious if you forget to save and then lose about 30 minutes of progress. Ask me how I know. It's not like it's happened. The promise is there, the potential is right there. You're exploring this creepy moon base, you know something is wrong, and then that's where things start to fall apart for me. Here's the thing about Routine. It feels like it kind of wants to be Alien Isolation on the moon. And I don't mean that as an insult, because Alien Isolation is fantastic, and if you're gonna borrow from something, borrow from the best. But where Alien Isolation maintained that tension throughout its entire runtime, Routine loses it pretty quickly. The first time you encounter an enemy, which I won't spoil, the trailer's already spoiled it, so I'll just put clips on in here. When you see it, you're genuinely scared. You know you're not equipped to fight it. You have this EMF device that can stun enemies temporarily, but that's it. You're running, you're hiding, you're trying to figure out the station's layout while these things are hunting you. But here's the problem. Once you figure that out, the enemy is actually pretty easy to avoid. The fear kind of just evaporates. The AI isn't particularly sophisticated. You learn the patterns quickly, and suddenly what was terrifying becomes more of an inconvenience rather than a threat. And this is like chapters 2 or 3 out of 6. There's a second enemy type that shows up later, and that one is more threatening. I actually died a couple times, because the first enemy won't necessarily kill you. You kind of have like this rebound where if it grabs you, he throws you around, and then you can run again. But that's besides the point. This second enemy, it appears so infrequently that it never really establishes itself as a consistent threat. You'll know what I mean based on the clips that I'm putting here, and if you play the game. It's like the game is scared to actually put you in danger too often, which is weird for a game that, you know, is supposed to be scary. And then there are the puzzles. Oh god, the puzzles. Look, I'm all for games that challenge you intellectually. I like having to think. But some of these puzzles in Routine are just obtuse. Maybe I'm just stupid. That's entirely possible. But for a game that's only 5 to 6 hours long, some of these solutions felt needlessly convoluted, in my opinion. There were multiple times where I was just wandering around frustrated because I couldn't figure out what the game wanted me to do next. And here's where the frustration becomes a real problem. It breaks the atmosphere. When you're spending 20 minutes trying to figure out where to go or what to do, you're just not scared anymore. You're not immersed in this horror experience, you're just annoyed. The game pulls you out of its own world because the puzzle design doesn't quite mesh with the horror pacing. The exploration is solid when you know where you're going, but the lack of direction can work against the game when you're stuck. And being stuck in a horror game is death to the experience. Horror thrives on momentum and atmosphere, and when you kill that momentum with a puzzle you can't figure out, it's hard to get that feeling back. Let me be clear about what Routine does well, because there is genuine quality here. The atmosphere and visual design are top tier. The moon base looks incredible. The views of the lunar surface throughout the windows are gorgeous, and when you walk on the surface. And the overall aesthetic is exactly what I would have wanted from a space horror game. That retro futuristic 80s vibe mixed with the modern graphics of Unity, not Unreal. Thankfully, you know, some people don't like Unreal Engine slop. And anyways, I digress. All I'm trying to say is that this unique look I really enjoyed. The sound design is also excellent. The creaks, the distant sounds of the station settling, even the sound design from the robots themselves. Oops, I just spoiled it. The environmental storytelling, like I mentioned earlier, is legitimately good. If you're someone who likes to read all the logs and piece together what happened, there's definitely a compelling story here about the crew, the relationships, and the discovery of this lunar entity, I'll call it. The game respects your intelligence and lets you discover the narrative at your own pace. And mechanically, the core idea is sound. No combat, just evasion and survival, exploring this hostile environment while you're trying to uncover the truth. Trust me, it's been done perfectly countless of times. One of my favorite games of all time is Outlast, and that game does it amazingly. But the execution is where it falters. The enemies aren't threatening enough to maintain tension throughout the game. After the first few chapters, I wasn't scared anymore. I was just going through the motions, and for a horror game that's kind of not good. See, if my memory serves me right, after the 3rd or 4th chapter, the first type of enemy just doesn't even show up anymore. So, if that doesn't explain it, I don't know what will. And overall, the plot itself is fine. It's not bad, but it's also not particularly memorable or unique either. Now, I won't go too much into it because, like I said, I don't necessarily know the specifics and I don't want to sound stupid, but it just never really grabbed me the way I wanted it to. By the end, I was almost relieved rather than satisfied with the conclusion. And the gameplay just isn't that fun. I know that sounds weird to say about a horror game. They're not necessarily supposed to be fun in the traditional sense, but there's a difference between tense, engaging horror gameplay and gameplay that feels like a chore. Routine too often fell into the latter category for me. And one final thing. Here's something that frustrated me about Routine in a broader sense. We don't get enough space horror games. We just don't. Dead Space is dormant. It's not getting remade anymore. Alien Isolation is a masterpiece. It's getting a sequel. God knows if I'll be alive when that sequel comes out. And the Callisto Protocol was divisive at best. Personally, I thought that game was amazing. But there's this massive untapped potential in this genre. And Routine, I feel like, had the opportunity to fill that void. After 10 plus years of development, after all that anticipation, this could have been the space horror game for this generation. It could have been the game people point to and say, this is why space horror is great. Instead, it's just okay. And that's almost more disappointing than if it was terrible, you know? Because terrible games you can laugh at and move on. Okay games that could have been great, those kind of stick with you in a different way. The game clearly wears its influence on its sleeve. You can see the Alien Isolation in the gameplay loop, Dead Space-ish in the aesthetic, even some Prey in the station design, to be honest. And paying homage is fine, but you have to add something new to the conversation. And I'm not sure Routine does that. It doesn't do anything particularly wrong, but it also doesn't do anything that makes it stand out. It's a competent space horror game in an era where we're kind of starving for competent space horror games, and that should be enough. But after 10 years, after all that potential, to me it just feels like it should have been more. So, bottom line, would I recommend Routine? If you're a huge space horror fan like me, then yeah, probably. It's worth experiencing, especially if you can get it on sale or on the Game Pass like I did. The atmosphere alone makes it worth checking out, and if you're someone who really digs environmental storytelling and piecing together lore from like scattered notes, computer logs, you'll probably enjoy that aspect of it. But go in with normal expectations. This isn't the revolutionary horror experience that the decade-long wait might have led you to believe. It's a solid 6 or 7 out of 10 game, which honestly in today's gaming landscape isn't bad. Most games are around that category. But when you've been waiting since 2012, when you've been dreaming about what this game could be, pretty good just isn't enough. The biggest shame is that you can see what this game could have been. The bones are there, the atmosphere is there, the setting is perfect, but the execution didn't just reach the heights it was aiming for. The horror loses itself, it's too early, the puzzles interrupt the pacing, and the gameplay loop doesn't evolve enough over the course of the game to stay engaging. I don't regret playing Routine. I'm glad I finally got to experience what Lunar Software spent over a decade creating. There's genuine craftsmanship here, and I respect the hell out of them for actually finishing and releasing this game when so many others would have just given up. But I also can't help but wonder what might have been. What if the development had been smoother? What if they had more resources or more time to iterate on the gameplay? Or, I don't know. It's not productive to dwell on hypotheticals, but when a game's potential is this visible, it's kind of hard not to. If you're looking for the next great space horror game, Routine might not be it, but if you're looking for a competent, atmospheric horror experience that respects your intelligence and doesn't hold your hand, it's worth your time. Just maybe wait for a sale. Or play it on the Game Pass. That's my take on Routine. I'd love to hear what you all think about the game, especially if you played it. Did it work better for you? Did the horror maintain its tension throughout your playthrough? Am I completely off base here? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed my opinion, Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Dislike the video if you disliked it. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, you made me feel so free.